Hey guys, got something that's a little bit outside my normal scale of kits that I typically look at here. We're going to be looking at Matchbox's 109E kit in 1/32 scale. Now, this kit is on the old side. It dates back from the late 1970s, which actually makes it older than I am. But it's nonetheless still an interesting kit to take a look at. This really represented a bit of an evolutionary period for model building, so I happened to see it at my local hobby store and picked it up and figured it'd make a good subject for this and to actually build up. So let's get into it. Okay. So, one thing about this kit that does tell you it's a little bit of an evolution is that it does have engraved panel lines, which you do see on more modern kits versus the raised ones from earlier kits. However, on this kit, they went a little overboard in terms of the size of it. They're quite large, and while they are somewhat deep, but it's more the width that's the issue, which puts them very much overscale. So something that would require a little bit of filling and ultimately rescribing. You might be able to get away with using something like Mr. Surface or others, similar type products, and then using that both as your guideline and to go back once it's dried. But again, you're going to need a really steady hand for that. So it's a bit of a negative, but it's not something that I would say is a deal breaker on, but it is something to be aware of. Overall, the casting is very sharp. Details are all nicely rendered. Board, we see the spacing for the nose mount machine guns, as well as all the appropriate panels that you would need to open up, molded separately so you can show off the engine if you so choose, which this kit does include, which we'll get to eventually. Also on this particular sprue, we got two halves for the rudder. Personally, I prefer if they cast parts like this as a single piece as opposed to two separate ones, just because it makes getting them aligned, it can be tricky, but I digress. Next up, we have sprue with a lot of the detail parts, including landing gear, which aren't the greatest, but they're workable. The machine guns, which I previously mentioned, which I would say, save for the barrels, are kind of wasted, as the detail really is not there. I would say that's something to definitely consider investing in. We've got part of the front console. It's a two-piece. When I get to the other part, I'll show you, but it's really oddly done how they chose to do it, and the comes with no actual instrument details. So that's something also to be aware of. Excuse me. We also have various parts that go into building up the Daimler-Benz engine, which are okay for an out-of-the-box type deal. I would say they're passable. Again, obviously they're not the same quality as a resin cast engine, but again, for something from the 1970s, this would be very high quality for the time. Now, continuing on, excuse me. We've got the main cockpit floor, which is okay. We got the main wings, which have a similar issue as the fuselage in terms of the panel lines, as well as parts for the ammo and some of the cockpit details, as well as the sidewalls. Sidewalls are better than the rest of the cockpit, but again, not as great as more modern. So it's, if you do consider this kit, I would say, investing in, say, a photo etch set or something would be definitely worth it. Not necessarily going full resin and all that, but something to consider. We also got the prop blades on, prop blades for the spinner, which are nicely done. No issues there. Continuing on, we've got the lower wing halves and the parts for the engine. Now, this is where, as I said, it's nice that the kit does include this, and for the time period, it's really nicely done. Would I say you want to go full resin? Not necessarily. I think you could get by quite well with just the kit parts. You might want to add in some little scratch built details, but really you actually get a pretty decent engine out of the box. And as I said, for a kit from the 70s, this is actually really nice, even for some of the more current ones. So yeah, here's, as I was mentioning a little earlier, the back part of the instrument panel. It's basically a couple of raised little divots, and I don't know what they were thinking with this, but it really just doesn't work that well. So obviously that's something to be aware of, and will obviously need replacing if you really want an accurate look, which, given how the canopy is, which I'll get to in a second, you're going to want, as you will be able to see a lot of the detail even without having the canopy in the open position. Now, one thing about the canopy is that it's the more curved and rounded that version that you see on the E4 versus the E3, which had a more blocky and square. The kit says it's supposed to build up to an E3, but the canopy parts are for an E4. Everything else with the aircraft is exactly the same. So something to be aware of. It's a little more nitpicky, but as I said, something to be aware of. So let me get these back in. Now, one thing about this kit that unfortunately is kind of hit and miss with some of these older kits is the decals. Fortunately, the decals in my example are kind of toast. I honestly think if I dip these in mortar, they're going to basically crack and be pretty well done without any real effort. So something to be aware of. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things that comes with older kits. Is if something's going to go, it's going to be the decals, just due to the fact that they're so sensitive to moisture and the like. That it's unfortunate, but something to be aware of. In general, though, it looks like the decals would be good if obviously this were a brand new kit and all of that. I would say decals are definitely a nice touch. So, moving on to the instructions. Assembly starts in with the engine and sort of progresses from there. Overall, assembly is not that difficult. It's pretty straightforward, surprisingly. From there, you go on to the cockpit. Let's see, almost neglected to mention, but the pilot figure, I would say pass. Not that great. So moves on to the cockpit, building up from the tub, seat, and some of the details. Then moves on to just behind or in front of the firewall, with the machine guns. And then here you can see what I mean by how they want you to build up the main console. It's just one of the weirdest and oddest designed ones I've ever seen. So that would, I'd say something, I'd say definitely replace, if you've got another 132nd 109, maybe cannibalize a part if you use the parts for another project. From there, it's pretty well straightforward. You basically just button it up and then stick the wings on. Overall, there's not a whole lot to say as far as the assembly goes. I mean, once you get past the cockpit, it's pretty well shake and bake. Now, an interesting thing with this kit is that they put all the coloring instructions in a separate pamphlet. They don't actually label it as you're going through and building it. So that's a bit of a pain, is that you're going to have to be bouncing back and forth between two separate sets of instructions, which it's going to get old, but is what it is, unfortunately. As far as markings, you're given 3 options, 2 German and 1 Slavic aircraft. Overall, it gives you a pretty decent amount of subjects. So, overall, this kit is a bit of a mixed bag. It's got some decent features that obviously make it a little bit of an appealing kit. One, obviously, is, it is an older kit, so you're not going to get all the same stuff that you'd get with a more modern kit. But at the same time, it does present a good kit with good bones. I mean, the shapes are there. A lot of the things you really need are there. It's just, you're obviously going to need to put a little bit of love and care into it. The other thing to consider is price. I actually picked this kit up for about $15. And when you compare that to more modern examples, I could use what I saved, buy photo etch set and a bunch of other stuff, and still probably not spend as much. So that is something to consider as well. Ultimately, we live and die by the price of stuff in this hobby. So being able to get a kit for, sub $20, that's definitely a major plus. And as I said, the bones are there. This kit will build up to a decent looking example of the type. You just are going to have to invest a little bit of time and effort into getting it there. And you know what? If you really aren't, a rivet counter or someone who wants an absolute close to perfect example, out of the box, it's still pretty decent, especially for the age. So I would say if you're a fan of older kits, you're a 109 collector, or you just want to build something different, I would say definitely give this kit a look. It's really, I would say, in my opinion, kind of worth the money. So that was a look at Matchbox's 1/32 scale 109E kit. Specifically, it will build up to the E4, not the E3, which some of the instructions do say about it. Interesting older kit that I would say is definitely worth your time. So until next time.